Mac Sheldon is a distributor for these pantarotor machines, and he asked me to come up with some animated pantograph display for his trade show booth showing the motion of cutting a tenon. So imagine this being the template, and this is the follower bearing. I need something to drag this around this shape continuously. And this is actually the drive chain for my old thickness planer that I smashed to make a jointer. And I already welded this piece of metal to one of the links. So that could go around here and drag the follower bearing like that. I could use the sprockets from the bicycle derailleur. They're not really drive sprockets, but they'll do for this purpose. So this would be the backer. And then this goes on here. So I showed Mac what I had so far, and he actually mentioned he'd been thinking of using sprockets of 5 to 8 inches in diameter. So clearly he had something much bigger in mind. I was originally going to have this chain drive this thing here, but instead I'm actually going to extend this pantograph down here and drive it down here. And that way this is at the same scale as what the router model is going to be. And so my motion ends up being much bigger. This part is going to be hidden in a box, which means I don't have to focus on hiding this chain anymore. So now I have ball bearings on both sides of the shafts for this thing. And then that fits together with this part here. And I've shortened the bit that I welded onto the chain. And then this pin is going to fit in there, and by having this thing very close to the chain, this will be much more robust. So I've got my pieces cut out. The CD-ROM represents the router, follower bearing, handle, and then this part here is going to be below the table that actuates the whole thing. Some of these links consist of multiple layers, and I've glued up some of these already here, and they're going to hinge together like this with a pin that goes through here. And that pin is only going to be held in place by friction, so I've been experimenting and drilling a 3/16 inch hole for a 3/16 inch pin. Makes it actually quite tight. In fact, I have to put it in with a hammer. That'll lock the pins in place. So this fits in here, and then I need to drill a hole for this 3/16 inch pin to turn freely. And I drilled a hole where it's loose with this drill, which is also a 3/16 inch drill, but it's a brad point bit, whereas the hole where it's tight was drilled with a 3/16 inch metal drill. And these metal drills sometimes drill a bit undersize in wood, whereas the brad points sometimes drill oversize. So this thing has got a bit of friction, which I really want to avoid. Plus I also realized I want to paint this thing, so I should make that middle member a little bit thinner to allow for a layer of paint. So now I have the mechanism perfectly balanced. With my topmost links hollowed out a little bit, I should need just a bit less counterweight. I got my base put together, and I've also added this cross beam and these gussets here, so that way it's stable without the front and back panel on, because I need those open to work on it. And here's my chain drive, and I've got a motor, and I found a gear in my box that totally goes with the gear that's already on this motor. So I'm using that, but the whole thing has a little bit of wiggle room like this, and that causes a bit of backlash. So I've made this little bearing block, and that goes on here. So I've got my chain drive here, and I've put some counterweights in the bottom here. And to keep this all together so it doesn't disengage with the chain, I've got this thing that goes against here. I'm still getting a bit of wiggling towards the top and bottom of it, and that's because this chain is not super tight, so I can move it up and down when it's in the middle. So I've got a little router ball bearing here, and now I'm just going to put this here, and that will prevent the ball bearing from rising too much above the chain. So now it's constrained on the straightaways, and around the corners there really isn't that much slack to begin with. Getting this all assembled is pretty tricky. So first the shaft, then the bearing. Now I'm going to put the shaft in the chain and tap it flush. And now put this on to lock it. With things tightened up on the bottom, this thing here, representing the router bit, should be able to move around this shape here, which represents a tenon, without getting too jumpy or getting too far away from the tenon. Well, it's rubbing a little bit, but it seems to be staying pretty close all around. I'm making a template holder to go behind the pantograph, and naturally I'm making that using my pantorouter. I'm cutting grooves into the pieces of wood to make them look a bit more like the aluminum extrusions. There's lots of work left to finish this up. I put the table together just with screws in from the top, and I glued in threaded inserts on the bottom so that it could be attached to this table and still be removable, because there's a good chance this will need to be taken apart for moving or for repair. And I've also put a template holder frame in the back, except this is too low because the template should be at about this height where the follower goes, and it's way down here. And the other mistake is it's too far back this way. So I think I'm just going to take it off the back and cut it off and put it on top to bring it closer to the front. A little bit of glue in the hole for the threaded inserts makes them stick better. I'm starting to think about how this thing comes apart to go to different trade shows, and I figure threaded inserts and bolts would probably be the easiest and most durable option. And bolts come in from here. There's a tiny little hole right here, and so this bent paper clip will prevent this pin from wandering out slowly over time. I still need something to hold the actual template on, and I figure I might as well make that look just like it does on the real panther rotor. Okay, this machine is finally done. I made a few more refinements and I put on the full-length operating lever because that would have hit the ceiling on my workbench, and that required a whole lot of extra counterweights back here so that the motor doesn't have to work so hard. And I added some hooks for holding these things when they're folded down for storage. And now I just got to take this thing apart and figure out how to get it into this box that I made for it. Well, I managed to get it in the box just barely. Everything is screwed down. It's quite the puzzle, so if you want to reuse that box the same way, you better take some careful notes and photos when you unpack it.